All right, we are continuing shading our cylinder, video 4. As always, I have my paper towel to protect my shading. I've got all of my graphite pencils, my ebony pencil, and my graphite stick. And I've got my pointy erasers, because these are drawing tools too, my large eraser, and plenty of folded up paper towels or store-bought tortillas for blending. Oh, and yes, my pencil sharpener. All right, we're going to keep going. We are using our primary reference, so make sure you have that up on your computer. I'm also thinking about my value scale, and I'm thinking about how the light is hitting it with our highlight, curving back with a little bit of shadow on that side, dark part of the shadow, reflected light, and cast shadow. All right, and we continue. So at this point, I've got a start on pretty much all parts of my cylinder. I'm continuing to erase any little straggling lines from early on that are still there that I don't need. And I think this is the area here that I haven't worked on much, so I'm going to continue to work on that area. And what I want to do is, since we are going to have some light on this side of the cylinder, I am going to shade in the background around this. I'm also thinking, though, about how the edge of this cylinder might get a little bit darker on this side. I don't really see that in this photo, but I think I'm going to play with that a little bit. I do see it a little bit here. So I'm going to play with this side of the cylinder and have it be darker than what's behind it in some places, and then lighter in others. So up here it's lighter, background's darker. Here we might switch that up and have it be a little bit darker and the background lighter, and then go back to cylinder darker, background lighter here. All right, so thinking about that, I'm going to get my light HB pencil and start to shade a little bit in this area. So here, let's say I'm going to keep shading outside the cylinder, and then let's say I have to decide where I'm going to make that switch. So I think I'm going to make that switch, let's say, right here, based on what I see in my photo, maybe happening there. So until I get to that point, I'm shading with the cylinder along this edge, so vertical marks at first, and then I can overlap those with horizontal marks to continue the shading horizontally to make that look like the table is laying down, and really carefully transitioning from one to the other. And here I can start extending these marks out a little bit. So if I am just keeping them really flat and straight, I can extend them out a little bit to give a little bit of shading to that background. Okay, and then let's say right here is where I want to transition. So then I'm going to shade on the cylinder itself. So I've turned that, and I'm going to make sure that I'm making this a smooth transition so that the side of the cylinder doesn't appear to change or be lumpy or bumpy. So, and as I'm doing this, since I am really making sure that this is accurate, and I'm really doing revisions to the drawing here. So as I'm doing those, I need to keep thinking about some of the things that we did early on, thinking about, do these edges line up? So where this kind of turn happens from the straight edge of the cylinder to the curve, I want to make sure that that lines up. So just kind of looking at that, considering that, making sure that that is really still lined up and that that horizontal matches the horizontal of the bottom of the page. Okay, so I think that does. Same thing with this edge. I may even, so you can see I'm getting my ruler out again and making sure that this is consistent and that it is vertical. And by vertical, I mean a true vertical. That's a 90-degree angle with my horizon, or eye level, if you will, edge of the table. And this is not actually my eye level, by the way. So, tabletop, that's what it is. It's the tabletop. So still keeping these really small marks and making sure that that shading matches that original line. So that original line, that outline, needed to be really light. If it was too dark, you would actually go back and erase that line until it became lighter. If yours is a little bit darker than mine, then maybe your shading will be a little bit darker, and then you will fade out. So now I've switched directions and I'm going to shade with sort of a curving mark there. Again, making sure this edge is really nice and crisp. And I think I'm going to flip-flop again here. So in this brightest part of the highlight, which is going to be right around here, let's say, I'm going to flip-flop and have the table be darker, so that we can have that white highlight in the center. So here, shading onto the table, keeping my marks small, and the trick is just to make sure that that edge still looks consistent as we flip-flop from shading on the cylinder to then shading outside the cylinder. So not an outline, but an edge, and it needs to be a consistent, crisp edge. And here, I'm creating this gradation along this edge, fading to white. So this is the kind of thing that's going to be really hard to see on camera. Okay, so we got a little closer up here, and you can see what's going on. So this may be where I'm using almost these kind of triangular shapes hatching in. And I would continue that as we go up the edge here. So I'm noticing here I have a little bit of a bump in the edge, so I'm making sure to straighten that out as best I can. And then if I need to lighten it up, I can lighten it up. And as I move up this edge, as this gets darker in the background, I can create this shadow, this light shadow along this edge. Where the cylinder curves. So continuing to shade there, we'll stick in this small area here. And we're going to continue refining this gradation. So I'm still shading with my lightest pencil, and I'm sure in here I will switch to my medium or dark pencil as I'm creating this transition going across. I've got some underdrawing lines, getting rid of those. So sitting back to look at the big picture a little bit, think about how I want this to go from reflected light to core shadow, darkest maybe in here, then going across that value scale. So we're going to hit all those values from darkest maybe around here to medium dark, medium to lightest. Okay, so continuing to shade across here, I'm actually going to darken up this core shadow. So I'm using one of my darker pencils now as I'm moving across. the same time, I can also continue the shading inside the cylinder. Noticing where it transitions to getting light. So we're going to hit probably that light gray around here. So now switching to my light pencil. And again, not making that edge totally even. So I'm making these sort of curving horizontal marks here. But this is not an even edge. This is uneven on purpose. So switch to my darker pencil there. All right, got a pretty smooth transition there. We can, if we want to, then continue that blend in here. And as I'm looking at this really closely, I can really lightly see that edge, so I'll make it a little bit shaded along this edge, but going into a gradation where this becomes white in here at that center. So just a really faint shadow in there. So notice again how this ellipse here is wider through the front and into here, and then starts getting skinnier toward the back. Because this part's closer, that part's farther. All right, so we've got that part done pretty well. Continuing our shading across here. I still have my light pencil. So creating this light area of shading in here. And there also is another way to do these areas where we want them to be light. So I've got a dirty blending tool now because I've blended maybe in some of these areas, or if you don't have a dirty blending tool, you could always take a piece of scrap paper and shade onto there with a darker pencil. And then get your blending tool dirty on purpose. So you can do some of this this shading you can actually do with your blending tool. So again, this will give you a different texture to it, so you're going to need to make sure that you can make those even. The other thing that happened here is where I started it got a little too dark, so then I would need to lightly with my eraser, using those same marks that are kind of a horizontal curve, if you will, I need to touch that up. So just an option in there. Oops. Used a darker pencil there, so I need to touch that up. And then of course another option that we were using, we've also got our 2B graphite stick. So want to make sure that you don't have anything on top of or underneath on your paper, like little pencil shavings, or you'll get kind of little dark marks. So connecting and overlapping these areas so that you've got this same type of mark. And then coming back and adding more of this dark area. I do also have one additional thing I can do for a dark area. It's larger. We can combine charcoal and graphite. This is my soft or vine charcoal or willow charcoal, not to be confused with a really dark compressed charcoal. This will give us a tone that matches our graphite fairly closely. So I can, and this is going to be very, very messy, very smudgy. So if you're a person who struggles with craftsmanship and keeping things from getting super messy, you may want to stay away from this. But if you think you can control this, this may help you to work into this area where you might not have the patience for the really small mark making. You could potentially use this and have this connect. Now again, because this is very blendy, smudgy, soft, it is going to blend out a lot, so be careful. We don't want to get this too dark over here, so if it starts getting too dark, we might come in with our eraser. We're going to be very, very careful of this edge that we created, making sure we stay on one side of it. So as needed, I might be coming back in here with my light pencil and making sure that that edge stays nice and crisp. And I'm not just making an outline here. I don't want an outline. I'm making sure that I have a crisp edge, and then I shade in and connect that to the rest of the shading. So if you are going over this outline and just leaving it as an outline, then it's not going to work. I'm just firming up this edge. So I have to shade in enough that that shading connects, so we don't see it as a separate outline. And notice I then also often use my eraser on the other side of that, making sure that that is really nice and straight. This area over here, I also want to make sure that this connects nicely. And one thing that I actually see happening in here is that we kind of have a place in here in the center where that line, that edge almost disappears. So if I want to be really, really sophisticated in my drawing, I can even have that happen in my drawing and let your eye connect those two parts. So you have to really work that fade out to get that to work. Now I may want to do a little bit of shading with my tool, but this is going to be way too dark. Or I just want to do some blending with it. So I'm getting a clean one, or you can sometimes like refold this inside out, but it might be nice to have a clean one and a dirty one. So make sure that you've got your paper towel that's going to protect your artwork. So the more shading we add, the more important that is, especially now that I've added some soft charcoal. All right, so I'm going to keep working on this center part of the cylinder. Notice I moved my scrap paper away. If this is underneath here and I start to shade it, I'm going to get a line, just like you do in a crayon rubbing, a texture rubbing. Alright, so continuing that shading, making sure that everything connects and overlaps so that you don't get areas with different kinds of mark making. You really have to make sure that these transitions happen smoothly. So keeping all those marks, whether you're blending or you're using your pencil, making sure that these marks are following the form. So I'm using these kind of curving side-to-side marks to get that curving form of the cylinder. And again, I'm not going to have an even edge here. So the same way that we made this purposely uneven, this was purposely uneven. Same thing here as we want to create that fade out. And this may be a part too where you can use your blending tool to get that very end of that fade out. I could even use a blending tool that's kind of a medium amount of dirty. So not the one I used on my charcoal, that's going to be really dark. A medium one to create some of the shading here. I'm going to continue this off camera and we will pick up again in a new video since this is already about 30 minutes long.